For those of you who have been sleep deprived enough to hallucinate, what was it like? In college, I tried to hold down a donut delivery job while taking a full credit load. I got up at 4:30 AM to deliver, and often was up until midnight or even later. After a particularly busy week with almost no sleep, I hallucinated a man crossing the street right in front of me while delivering, and I slammed on my brakes to avoid hitting him. When I realized that there was no one in the crosswalk, and no one anywhere in sight, I finished my deliveries and immediately quit my job. I once spent 3 days without sleep. By the third day everything was in soft focus. Colors were on and I was hearing voices whispering my name. I do not recommend it. May I ask why you didn't sleep for so long? I was young, dumb and determined to burn the candle at both ends. It was 3 days of working, partying and video games. I'm too old for that nowadays. I love my bed too much. They were auditory, but I heard sirens in the distance and just kind of weird sounds. Not really voices or anything distinguishable. While deployed overseas with lack of sleep for like 70+ hours, I would black out and re-experience dream completely different scenarios that happened days prior. It was crazy. Like deja vu. But for like an hour. I'd snap out of it and be completely confused for like 30 seconds. Wondering which experience was real. Wow. This sounds crazy. Like a movie plot lol. I can't even begin to imagine how that must feel. 70+ hours. Yup. I would work 12 hours 6 days a week. And the 7th day was a 6-hour shift, for a total of 78 hours per week. It's exhausting. But you got used to it since you had to accept your new reality. Going back to 8-hour shifts after deployment felt like I was working half days. When Need for Speed Underground 2 came out on PS2 I stayed up for 3 days. Aside from being extremely tired and vision hearing being very impaired, everything was mostly normal. Until I woke up standing inside Subway probably 10 miles away with no memory of how I got there. I guess I was hungry. Very calm as far as hallucinations go. I had driven for 20+ hours and was in the Arizona-California desert. It was the middle of the night. It had been dark for hours and only other car lights and stars were visible. Started seeing things out of the corner of my eyes. Just kind of objects off a distance on the side of the road. Then it was things in the road ahead. That got my attention. After a bit I started seeing fantastic meteor light showers in the sky. Wasn't scary or anything. Didn't stop driving. To be young, dumb, and invincible again. It was the weirdest thing. I was taking notes on an extremely boring video in theology, but then words started appearing on their own without me writing anything. They were dancing around for a bit and I found it completely normal for a bit, but then I realized that words aren't supposed to dance. Then I snapped back to reality with nothing on my paper. When I was in university, immediately after my father died, OD'd on Christmas Eve after I threw him out, I pretty much quit sleeping. Maybe 3-4 hours a night. Went through lots of counseling. Lots of medication. 7 different sedatives and SSRIs. But basically just couldn't sleep. We had a home birth for my niece, so even when the grief wasn't overwhelming, the newborn baby kept me up. Anyways, I knew it got bad when I started microsleeping. I'd be in class listening to lecture. Blink and police officers would be standing beside me explaining what had transpired. Then blink and I'd be back listening to class. Maybe mentally be out of it for 5-10 seconds, but felt entirely lucid other than time dilation. The psychiatrist at the time said I was dropping into REM because I was so sleep deprived. Happens with new moms when babies are cluster feeding. I wasn't driving or anything, so not dangerous that way, but honestly lived in a fog for years. Just like snap of the finger, perfectly lucid horrible moment of my life, snap of the finger back. During this period I had a thing where I quit talking to people at school to see how long they would go without chatting to me. Literally had week stretches where not a word was said. Then came finals. Started vomiting with anxiety when I tried to enter the exam rooms, which was an auto fail for my classes. So academic probation. The opportunity to testify would speak in front of the university senate, which I clearly couldn't do. And eventual complete failure. There were times where I was hitting the student food bank after hours because I literally couldn't walk into a grocery store because my anxiety was so severe. So definitely can happen, but for me was pretty extreme situation. I sat down on the couch at 6:59 PM, not sure if I should go to bed then, after not sleeping at all the night before, or try and force myself to stay up another few hours so that I wouldn't wake up too early the next day and throw off my whole sleep cycle. Well, I felt like I couldn't even force my eyes open another minute. The next thing I know, I am waking up and it feels like it is the middle of the night and I am wide awake and mad at myself for letting myself fall asleep that early and throwing off my whole sleep cycle, but it is what it is now. I get up and go to make myself some tea and the time on the stove catches my eye and it says 7 o'clock. So I assume it is 7 AM and I must have slept a lot longer than I thought and I didn't throw my sleep cycle off after all. But then I see it is kind of dark out. So I look at my calendar on my phone. It is 7 PM on the same day I sat on the couch. Literally only 60 seconds had passed since I sat down and contemplated trying to keep myself awake. Still can't figure out how it happened. It's a common occurrence for me. Nothing too out there, though, usually just visual aberrations. Like constantly seeing shadows moving in my peripheral vision. Mistaking random objects for completely different objects. etc. Plus occasional auditory disturbances along with the typical sense of displacement. Once or twice I had instances where familiar people were complete strangers. No recognition whatsoever. That was pretty trippy and more than a little terrifying. For context, this happened during some military training. Laying down in the woods desperately trying to stay awake. Usually the plants turn into people. Like you'll see a figure walking around out in front of you. And then come to and realize it was just a sapling or a bush or something. Happened surprisingly more during the day than the night. I had a similar experience during military training. It was really dark out. And I hadn't slept for at least 48 hours. I saw and heard several people crawling towards me in the bushes and I thought it was part of the exercise as we were on guard duty. Just laying in the mud watching the woods. I called out to them several times. And my sergeant even had to go into the bushes to convince me there was no one there. It's honestly scary. Like one time I was on the verge of falling asleep and I thought I felt somebody run their finger across my cheek. When I snapped upright into a sitting position. Nobody was there. I live alone BTW. I'm sure I hallucinated it, but that shit is scary regardless. The same thing happened to me when I was a kid. I was just falling asleep and then I feel a hand on my head and I jerk up and search my whole room. I didn't sleep that night. I used to have episodes of insomnia as a teenager. Once, while walking home from school, I saw a car driving in my direction. It suddenly veered onto the sidewalk, continued toward me, and swerved back onto the road moments before hitting me. I thought it was real. But I was so out of it from exhaustion that I didn't even flinch. I realized a few days later that the curb of the sidewalk was too high for a car to have possibly driven over. Scary enough, it always happens while driving. I wouldn't say I'm hallucinating so much as dreaming with my eyes open. The darkness begins to creep in from the side until you're somewhere else for what feels like you've always been there. Then you feel your eyes open and bam. Adrenaline. Only lasts for a moment until the same darkness begins creeping from the side again and you're doing everything you can to keep your eyes open. But keeping them open doesn't help. When I had a new baby, I was in Target with the baby and got a call from an officer. Turns out I had left every single door of my car open. He thought it was a break-in. It was not. Just me sleep deprived. Why was there any reason to open every door in the first place? Life with a fresh human is rough. The first week of me having my daughter I had slept 7 hours total. I couldn't complete taking a shower that week because every time I'd start I'd hear my daughter crying hysterically and my fiancé screaming my name. I'd frantically run out of the bathroom to find my daughter peacefully asleep and fiancé in the room with her. I was in Costa Rica patrolling the beaches every night to find sea turtles laying their eggs. It was a eco-vacation thing, so during the day we would be up and exploring the area. I don't know how they expected people to function on like 3 hours of sleep for a week. But we did it. I mostly remember super irrational thoughts. Thinking animal noises were people talking. Thinking monkeys were dogs up in the trees. But the hallucinations were crazy. I'm not sure if the beach really was glowing some. Or if I was making all of it up. But my mind was making crazy glowing patterns in the sand. I thought the glowing stuff was also biting me. Really, it was sand fleas. We would stop and take a break mid-patrol. I'd lay down to rest and think I was still walking. Then wake up and keep walking. I got really confused as to when I was awake. Never saw a ducking sea turtle. I once went 106 hours without sleep. No drugas. Not even caffeine. After 48 hours it was just to see how long I could go. Started seeing movement in my peripheral vision. Like Freddy Krueger darting between aisles. I felt and heard my foot go through the floor. It didn't. When I went to sleep, I was out instantly. When I woke up it felt like the best 10-12 hours of sleep I ever had. I had only been asleep for about 2 hours. I stayed up for about another 20 hours because I felt so well rested. Used to overwork myself to the point of hallucinations fairly regularly. Most were auditory. I'd hear someone talking nearby, usually saying my name or just a couple of muffled syllables. Bits of songs, like having an earworm except louder. Lol. A distant ringing telephone was also common. Less commonly I'd hear something loudly falling somewhere. Visually, I'd mostly see flashes of color or blackness in the periphery of my vision. Like when someone walks by and you just barely see them out of the corner of your eye. Tall figures in the room, such as a coat on a rack, would also briefly appear to be a person standing there. Those were probably the most startling to me. University student. During finals week my freshman year I forgot to take off work and ended up having to work from like 4 to 10 PM. Get off. Go to the library till like 5 to 6 AM. My lib is open 24 hours. Wake up. Take the final at 8. And just study more until I had work next. I remember when I'd get back to my dorm room around 5:30 it'd be completely dark. And I'd be seeing the craziest ducking colors. I've dabbled psychedelics a little and it's literally just like that. Like a small 10-minute acid trip before I'd completely is out. Might get a brain tumor by age 40 but hey. Absolutely held my finals that year. Never had audio hallucinations like the rest of these comments say though. Chronic insomniac here. I have lots of stories, especially sleep paralysis, that happened twice. I legit thought I was dying when the hooded man without a face hovered next to my bed. I also woke up one morning after a restless night to see a girl standing by my bed in a white nightgown. I shrugged it off and rolled over. It wasn't until I woke up later that I realized what happened. I did a major cleanse that night and never saw her in my apartment again. This was years ago. Over one summer in high school, my friends and I stayed awake for a few days playing Dungeons and Dragons and other RPGs. We had tons of sugar and caffeine to help us play through the pain. I was laying on the couch staring at the ceiling and I saw a leprechaun, may have been a gnome, hard to tell from that distance, walk into view standing on the ceiling. He looked down at me, smiled and offed his hat to me, and started to dance a jig. I said to myself, oh hell no, and buried my head in the pillow until I fell asleep. Back when I was younger my whole family left to France. It's literally thousands of km away. I was home alone for a month. I've never been scared of being home alone and I knew I can do everything by myself. I'm in a wheelchair so it could be an issue for most, and I could always call my neighbors etc. But for some reason I just couldn't sleep. Always been a night owl kind of person anyways though. So, In all these 30 days I slept maybe 1-4 a day. Maximum. Oftentimes staying up for days. A friend of mine I Skyped with once said I fell asleep with my eyes open. When it comes to hallucinations, I'm pretty sure I saw my walls moving kind of like waves. When looking around everything seemed to be moving in a weird way. It was too realistic. But I knew it isn't real. Nothing bad ever happened though. I was fine, and as soon as my family got back, I was able to sleep properly too. I had a terrible cough. So bad that I'd cough myself awake and ended up staying awake for days on end. At the end of it I was hallucinating there's something in the kitchen. Repeating that over and over again. I had a sense of impending doom, like there was some sort of overwhelming thing increasingly progressing towards some tipping point. Where something terrible was going to happen. It's hard to really convey, but it was terrifying. Shadows creeping up the walls. But it's complete blackness and tendrils consuming everything. Or skittering shadows in my peripheral that look like people. Animals. Or bugs moving. Whispering. Talking. Or worse, singing. Sometimes I'll hear what sounds like music playing. And when I try to figure out where it comes from, it disappears. So I go back to whatever I was doing. And then I'll start hearing children singing or people talking. Footsteps. Or a door closing. I get this from insomnia. Before I have a seizure. Or if I get too overwhelmed or overtaxed.